My name is Claire, and I'm 26. I should probably tell you this story isn't mine, at least, not the way I wanted it to be. It belongs to my brother, Daniel, who's 24. When our grandfather died, I thought everything he built, his house, his land, his businesses, was meant for me. That's what our father promised, what he made me believe my whole life. And when the lawyer read the will, it seemed like that promise was real. Every piece of the inheritance was handed to me, while Daniel sat in silence, looking like he'd been erased. But that silence didn't last. Because while I was already planning to sell the land and move on, Daniel was holding something none of us knew about, a letter written by our grandfather himself. A letter that carried a secret so sharp it cut through everything we thought was settled. You think you know who wins when a family fights over money. You think the one with the power always gets away with it. But you don't know Daniel. You don't know what our grandfather left behind for him. This is the story of how my brother went from nothing to holding everything. And how I learned the hard way that legacies aren't stolen. They're defended. The last time I saw my grandfather alive, he was sitting on the porch of his old farmhouse, his cane leaning against the railing, the evening sun drawing long shadows across the fields he had worked his entire life. His voice was thin, but his eyes still carried the same steel I'd known since I was a boy. He told me, "Don't ever let anyone decide your worth for you." I didn't know those words would come back to me on the day of the reading of his will, the day my family made it perfectly clear what they thought I was worth. The meeting was held in the front room of his house, the same place where he used to gather us for Thanksgiving dinners. Now the table was cleared, only the lawyer's files stacked neatly in front of him. My father sat at the head like he owned the place already, his arm draped lazily over the chair, his grin sharp and rehearsed. My sister, Claire, sat beside him, dressed in black but radiating satisfaction. I noticed how her hands were already twitching with impatience, as though she couldn't wait to sign papers and start liquidating assets. I sat across from them, silent, keeping my expression blank. My jaw ached from how tightly I was holding back. The lawyer, a gray-haired man named Mr. Hayward, cleared his throat and began reading. His voice was calm, neutral, professional. He listed properties, acre after acre of farmland, the house, the machinery, the shares in 2 local businesses. And then, without hesitation, he declared that all of it was to be transferred to Claire. Every single piece. My father chuckled, tapping his finger on the table like it was a done deal. "Makes sense," he said. "She's the responsible one. You never were. Your grandfather knew that." Claire leaned back in her chair, a smile spreading across her face. "I already have some buyers lined up," she said with a laugh. "That land is just sitting there. Might as well get something out of it." Her voice sliced through me. I wanted to speak, to protest, to remind them of the years I'd spent helping Grandpa repair fences, harvest crops, and run the tractors when no one else would bother. But I didn't. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms, and kept my silence. If I opened my mouth, I knew my father would dismiss me, the same way he always had. As they celebrated, yes, celebrated, the lawyer began gathering his papers. My father poured himself another glass of water, lifted it in a mock toast to Claire, and smirked at me. That smirk said everything. It said I was worthless, a disappointment, a shadow. That's when it happened. Mr. Hayward leaned slightly toward me, his movement almost imperceptible, and slid an envelope across the table, careful to keep it out of sight for my father and sister. His eyes met mine for just a second, and in that look was a warning, "Do not open this here." I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket, my heart pounding against it like it had just been wired to a clock. I excused myself quietly and stepped outside into the cool air. The sound of Claire's laughter followed me out the door. Standing by the porch railing where Grandpa used to sit, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in his unmistakable handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The words were simple, but every sentence landed like a strike of thunder. He wrote that the official will everyone had seen was not his true final intention. He had been pressured, manipulated during his last months, and had signed papers he never trusted. He explained that he'd worked with Mr. Hayward to prepare another, private document, a hidden will that held his real wishes. And in that will, everything, the land, the house, the businesses, was mine. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. My chest tightened, a rush of disbelief mixing with something darker. It wasn't just relief. It was vindication. Every dismissal, every insult, every smirk from my father, Grandpa had seen through it. He had seen me. Inside the envelope was more than just the letter. There were copies of documents, signed and notarized, dated after the version my father and sister were celebrating over. Ironclad. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. My fingers gripped the railing, and for the first time that day, I let myself smile. Not wide, not obvious, but enough to feel the corner of my mouth curve. The next time we sat at that table, I wouldn't be silent. Later that week, Mr. Hayward called another meeting. The same room, the same chairs, the same smug expressions on my father and sister's faces. Claire was already talking about renovations she'd make before she sold the farmhouse. My father kept nodding, his confidence absolute. Mr. Hayward began slowly this time, his tone carrying more weight. He explained that while the will read earlier was valid, there had been another document, created afterward. My father leaned forward, confusion flickering across his face. Claire stopped talking, her smile faltering. Then Hayward unfolded the papers and began to read aloud my grandfather's real will. The room changed in an instant. The air went heavy. Claire's face drained of color so quickly it looked like she'd been pulled under cold water. My father's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. Their certainty cracked before my eyes. Everything, the house, the land, the businesses, was left to me. Me, the son they thought wasn't worth a dime. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst could have been. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I simply sat there, steady, while they struggled to process what had just happened. My father finally tried to protest, his voice rough. This can't be right. There must be a mistake. But Mr. Hayward only shook his head. It's all in order. Your father was very clear. This was his final legal will. I watched Claire's eyes flicker with panic, her earlier laughter gone, replaced by something sharp and bitter. She looked at me, and in her gaze I saw not just anger, but fear. The moment Mr. Hayward's voice finished echoing through the room, silence followed like a weight pressing down on all of us. My father's hands were still on the table, his knuckles white, his jaw stiff. Claire stared straight at the papers in front of her, her lips parted but no words leaving. The confidence she carried before was stripped away in one sweep, like someone had yanked a rug from beneath her. I sat still, not moving, letting the truth hang in the air. My grandfather's words, his real words, had reshaped the entire balance of this family. My father was no longer the gatekeeper. Claire was no longer the heir apparent. Everything they thought belonged to them was now mine, and the lawyer's steady tone left no space for doubt. When my father finally spoke, his voice was uneven, louder than it needed to be. This doesn't make sense. He was old. He wasn't thinking clearly. He leaned toward Mr. Hayward, pointing at the documents as though sheer force could change them. You know my father. He never trusted lawyers. He wouldn't have made last-minute changes without telling me. Hayward didn't flinch. He did. He was deliberate. Every page here is signed, dated, and notarized. This represents his last, binding decision. There's nothing ambiguous about it. Claire's eyes snapped toward me. The way she looked at me carried more than anger. It carried betrayal, like I had stolen something from her, even though I hadn't touched a thing. Her voice was sharp. You knew. You've been sitting there waiting for this moment. I held her stare. I didn't know until the letter. Grandpa made his choice. He saw through both of you. The words stung her. I could see it in her face. My father, though, wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, took a long breath, and tried to collect himself. If you think you're going to waltz in and run this land, you're mistaken. You've never handled responsibility in your life. Claire and I have been preparing for this for years. You're not cut out for it. For years I had let him define me, but in that moment, I realized his words no longer had the same power. The land, the house, the businesses, they were mine by law, by my grandfather's final will. I didn't need his approval. Hayward stacked the papers, slid them into a folder, and closed it with deliberate calm. The matter is settled. We'll file this with the court immediately. Unless either of you intend to contest it, which will be a long, expensive battle you're unlikely to win. The tension in the room deepened. Claire's hands gripped the arms of her chair. My father's jaw flexed. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. I'm done here, I said. You wanted everything for yourselves. Now you'll watch me take it all. I walked out, leaving them stewing in their shock. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. But beneath that calm, I knew the fight wasn't over. My father wasn't a man who accepted defeat, and Claire wasn't someone who surrendered what she believed was hers. They'd come at me in their own ways. I had to be ready. That night, I drove back to the farmhouse. The fields stretched out under the moonlight, the barns casting long shadows. I stood on the porch, the same spot where Grandpa used to sit. I could almost hear his voice reminding me not to let anyone decide my worth. Now, that advice was more than memory, it was my weapon. The next morning, I started walking the land. The soil was damp from last night's rain, the air cool against my skin. Every acre reminded me of hours I had spent here growing up, fixing gates, hauling equipment, sweating beside Grandpa while Claire and my father stayed inside. They didn't know this land the way I did. That was my advantage. But I also knew they weren't going to walk away. My father would try to push me, to intimidate me. Claire would scheme, looking for loopholes or ways to discredit me. If they thought they could break me, they were wrong. The first move came sooner than expected. 2 days later, a truck pulled up the gravel drive. My father stepped out, his shoulders squared, his expression cold. Claire followed behind him, her heels crunching against the dirt. They didn't come to talk. They came to stake their claim, even after being stripped of it. My father wasted no time. You think one piece of paper changes everything? This place doesn't run itself. You won't last a month before you realize how far out of your depth you are. I leaned against the porch railing, calm. Grandpa trusted me with it, not you. Maybe he finally saw through your act. Claire's voice cut in, sharp and deliberate. You can't even manage your own life, and now you expect us to believe you'll run all this? You're going to ruin everything he built. I shook my head. What ruined him was having family more interested in selling off his legacy than preserving it. Her face hardened. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. We'll fight this in court. Don't think you can keep it. That lawyer won't protect you when the money runs out. I met his stare. Fight if you want. But every hour you spend, every dollar you waste, it'll end the same way, with you walking away empty-handed. For a second, his face twitched, the mask slipping. He wasn't used to me talking back. Not like this. He turned sharply, gesturing for Claire to follow, and they left without another word. Watching their truck vanish down the drive, I knew I'd struck a nerve. But I also knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't stop. They'd circle, waiting for a weak spot, ready to strike. That night, I met with Mr. Hayward again in his office. The room smelled faintly of paper and dust, the walls lined with shelves of legal texts. He adjusted his glasses, flipping through files. They may try to contest. If they do, we'll handle it. But I suspect they'll go another route. Be careful. They'll try to undermine you outside the law. I know, I said. That's why I need to be ready. Hayward slid a different file across the desk. Your grandfather wasn't only concerned about the land. He left you detailed notes. He knew this wouldn't go over smoothly. These records, accounts, business contacts, strategies, will help you step in immediately. He prepared you more than you realize. I opened the folder and scanned through the papers. Grandpa's handwriting filled the margins, names, instructions, warnings. He had planned this carefully, knowing my father and sister would try to tear it apart. He trusted me to hold it together. Walking out of that office, I carried more than documents. I carried a roadmap, a plan left by the man who believed in me when no one else did. The following week, I began making moves. I met with the managers of the businesses. Some were skeptical, expecting Claire or my father to take charge. But when I showed them the legal documents and explained Grandpa's wishes, most respected the clarity. A few hesitated, worried about retaliation from my family. I made it clear that if they stood with me, I'd protect what Grandpa built. The pushback came quickly. Rumors started spreading in town, whispers that I was unfit, irresponsible, that I'd already started making reckless decisions. I recognized Claire's fingerprints all over it. She was poisoning the air before I even had time to settle in. I didn't confront her directly. Not yet. Instead, I focused on securing the foundation, strengthening ties with people who mattered, building support in silence. If she wanted to spread rumors, let her. The truth would cut deeper when it surfaced. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, I stood outside the farmhouse and looked across the land. My father's truck slowed at the edge of the property, headlights cutting across the dirt road, before speeding off again. He wasn't done with me. Neither was Claire. The days after my father's threat were tense, but predictable. He circled me the way a man circles something he believes should be his. Claire, on the other hand, struck like a wasp, buzzing through town, whispering to anyone who would listen that I was incapable, reckless, undeserving. They weren't united out of love. They were united because greed tied them together. I didn't waste time answering whispers. I knew the truth would settle louder than words ever could. Instead, I focused on the plan Grandpa left me. His notes weren't just about operations, they were strategies for dealing with both of them. He had anticipated every angle they'd use. The first blow landed on a Monday morning. I arrived at one of the local businesses, a feed supply store Grandpa had partial ownership of, only to find the doors locked and the manager rattled. He told me Claire had been there the night before, spreading stories that I planned to sell the business and run off with the profits. Customers were already calling, asking if their orders were safe. She hadn't come with evidence. She came with confidence, and that had been enough to shake people. I didn't panic. I called a meeting with the staff and laid out everything clearly. The will, the documents, the plan. Then I handed them copies of the notes Grandpa had written about how important this business was to the community. The staff read his handwriting, recognized his words, and the room shifted. The loyalty she tried to steal swung back. Later that evening, I drove back to the farmhouse. The porch light was on. My father's truck sat at the edge of the drive, his shadow stretched across the gravel. Claire stood beside him, arms crossed, her face tight with rage. They were waiting. I stepped out of my car. My father didn't waste time. You're tearing this family apart. Do you even see what you're doing? I walked closer, steady. No, Grandpa's the one who saw what you two were doing. He made sure you couldn't finish the job. Claire snapped. You stole everything from me. You took my future. I shook my head. You didn't lose it. You never had it. You wanted to cash out, to erase his work. That's not a future. That's destruction. My father took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. If you think you can keep this land, these businesses, without us, you're dreaming. You'll fail, and when you do, we'll be there to pick up the pieces. I pulled out the final piece of paper I had kept hidden until now. It was Grandpa's letter, the one Hayward gave me first, the one with his words written only for me. I held it up. You can fight me. You can spread lies. But this is what he left me. He said he trusted me, not you. That's why he gave me everything. Because he knew the truth about both of you. I read aloud the line that mattered most. Don't let them decide your worth. They'll try, but you have to stand. The words cut through the night. Claire's face twisted, her anger spilling into frustration. My father looked away, his jaw tight, the fight slipping out of him because he knew he couldn't argue with what was written in his own father's hand. For a moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of crickets in the fields. Then Claire spoke, her voice breaking. You'll regret this. No, I said. You will, because you thought you could bury me. Instead, you buried yourselves. They left without another word, their footsteps sharp against the gravel, their truck disappearing down the road. For the first time in my life, they didn't look bigger than me. They looked smaller, like the weight of losing had finally sunk in. In the weeks that followed, the storm quieted. The legal filings went through without issue. The businesses stabilized. The rumors faded when people saw I wasn't selling, wasn't running, wasn't folding. Instead, I was present every day, on the land, in the stores, meeting with people who had known my grandfather his entire life. Slowly, the family name, which they had tried to twist for their own gain, started to steady under my hands. I didn't hear from Claire again except through distant gossip. She moved on, bitter, chasing opportunities far from here. My father stayed in town, but his influence withered. People saw through him now, his power stripped, his pride broken. We spoke only once after it all, when he stopped by the farmhouse months later. He stood on the porch where Grandpa once sat, his face older than I remembered. "You won," he said quietly. "No," I answered. "Grandpa did. He made sure his legacy didn't die in your hands." He nodded, but there was no acceptance in it, just resignation. He left without looking back. The land remained mine, not just in name, but in purpose. Every fence I fixed, every harvest I oversaw, every decision I made tied me closer to the place where I had spent so many years under my grandfather's watch. His voice lingered in my memory, sharper now than ever. He hadn't left me with money or property alone. He had left me with proof that I was worth more than they ever let me believe. Standing on the porch one evening, I watched the sun sink over the fields, the same view Grandpa had cherished. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by their judgment. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything he had trusted me with.